Hey, y'all. Thank you for tuning in for another session of Doc Phoenix's Pleasure Prescriptions, where we provide sensual sessions that are healing to your soul. Today, I am happy to have my good friend, grief coach Kimberly Moore. And this one is very special to me. Not to say that any other guests aren't special, but I can remember a while back we talked about how we would have our coaching practices and we do this and we do that. And fast forward nearly I think we start in the very beginning. I think our very first conversations kind of dealt with the route that we want to take. So fast forward 5 years and here we are doing our things in our separate professions. But today we kind of want to talk about how they correlate. And like I said, she's a grief coach. So you may be thinking, like, what does grief have to do with sex or kink? Well, one of my things is I want to speak to the whole person. I want to speak to healing in the whole person. And sometimes we have grief and we're carrying around things that we're not even aware of. And there are professionals who can help you with that. You may not feel like you need to go to a therapist, but there are things you may be grieving. So I don't want to get too far into it. As far as like what grief is, what it looks like, what it is beyond losing someone. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I want her to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her and how she got started.
So I am, as she said, Kimberly Moore. My practice is the Lotus Effect Coaching, and I go by Coach K, usually when I'm with my clients. I got into this work because I always say that grief really chose me. I have dealt with a lot of loss in my life, from things that we commonly know, like, death. I've lost family members, a lot of like my aunt who raised me, my sister, etc. But I've also dealt with grief in the sense of divorce and other aspects that you would consider a loss. So really, grief shows up anytime there's a loss of attachment. Mm-hmm. So if you're attached to a dream, you can grieve over a dream or situation. A divorce, retirement. People don't think that, my life is changing and now I don't drive to work, I don't talk to the same people, etc. This also could be a form of grief. So grief shows up in many different ways in our lives.
Okay. All right. That's pretty cool. All right. And so we both kind of mentioned a little bit of how grief is not just losing someone and having that final look at them, but it appears differently and it's like a universal truth. But it shows up differently in people. It affects people differently. Can you tell us some ways that grief may show up in people?
So, well, first of all, too, I want to say, like, grief is an equalizer, right? Nobody's going to get out of here alive. Everybody's going to experience it in some type of shape, way, or form. And so it doesn't matter how much money you make or how poor you are. Like, either way, you will experience it. And to say it's something that is so common and that people kind of shy away from, and we all experience it, it is nice to have and to know, like, there are resources, there are people out there who I can talk to about this. But grief shows up in different ways and different people as individualized as our fingerprint. Some people go into what may look like a depression, right? They get in bed, they don't want to get out. Some get overactive and they start like being super busy trying to avoid any type of feelings, pains, or anything that they would associate with the loss. So it can show up in many different ways and forms, and it's just being aware of your pattern, right? Mm-hmm. And then as a coach, what I do is I join you in that awareness, right? And then I help break that pattern up, and then we talk about what life can look like after that and how you can now, I guess, intersect that and the pain, right? Because it doesn't just go away. It may ease up, it may start to look different, but I want to take the journey with you until you get to the phase where it's like, I'm bringing in more love when I think about the loss and hurt or pain, and how to honor that loss.
Okay. You mentioned something about bringing someone to the awareness. Like, why is making someone aware that they may be grieving? Why is that so important?
Well, for one reason, all emotions that we go through is kind of like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. So when you don't make it, bring it to your attention, if you're not actually dealing with what the emotion is, all it is like trying to keep that ball up underwater, and eventually it's going to pop up. And it's going to probably pop up in a way that you rather it not, right? You start taking it out on other family members. You start taking it out on kids. You're talking about your manager at work, when really and truly it's about the loss and the feeling that you have now of being maybe neglected or isolated, or feeling like you have to start over. Like, loss feels so unfair.
It does. All right. I know we just talked about the importance of recognizing it, and with me being dealing a lot with like intimacy, and you just said sometimes you may take it out on your loved ones. I was just thinking that maybe it's not even a physical, I'm taking it out on you, I'm fussing at you. Like, maybe I just don't want to be bothered with you, or maybe I don't even want to be touched. So I kind of want to delve more into how grief may affect you intimately, like with your partner or partners.
So dealing with any type of life changes, right, is usually you want to look at it from a holistic, right? Your whole person, right? So mind, body, and soul. The way that grief can manifest in the body is sometimes we disconnect, right? And a lot of the times with grief is, when you think of it from a physical aspect, the brain is trying to connect something that was there that's no longer there. It's very much so like a pattern. Every day I come home, the dog runs to the door, I do this, and now the dog has passed and now I don't have that. So your brain is like, out of habit, I'm trying to figure out what exactly how do I connect? How can I create a new pathway to what was? And so that's the part that usually a lot of people is like, oh my gosh, like I used to drive up and, she would come outside, or she would call me at this time, and now I don't get that. And so now it's like, how can I still honor that? How can I create something new to also still fill the gap of what I've lost? So that's one side of it. The other side of it is, some people, when they disconnect from people or life, or they get super busy and they try to avoid the pain, and it makes others feel isolated, and it's not an opportunity for anybody to actually come and support you, right? Because you've disconnected, you have, basically said, I'm done with this part of my life, or this hurts too bad, I don't want anybody to see it. The opposite side is becoming like hyper vigilant, right? Like hypersexual, hyper whatever, like you turn into, because now you want to, first, one of the reasons is you want to break from the pain, right? So it's like, I want to escape. This feels good, and it's going to give me this 15 minutes of feeling good. I have a longer last, I don't know. But, you're getting the opportunity to have a break from the pain, right? So I want to be held. I want to be touched. I want to, feel, I want to be seen, but I don't want to think about that pain. Okay. So most of the time you can find people going either way. Okay. I don't want to be touched. I don't want to be bothered, or please touch me. Let me forget about this. And trying to prove to themselves, like, I am still human. I am still alive. This makes me feel alive.
I feel something.
Yes, I feel something other than the pain.
I put my hand to the stove. I like that song. Just to see if you feel something. So that makes sense. Because I know I've been in a space before where it was like I've almost felt numb, and it wasn't always a sense of losing someone physically, like the finality of death, but like we talked about, like just grieving or mourning the loss of something, the life that I thought that I was going to have. Yeah. And you just go through a period of numbness, and you don't really realize it. Like, you're going through the motions. I remember feeling like aggravated for some reason. Then it was like, do I even feel? Yeah. And then I would experience something that made me realize that I did feel. And even if it hurt, even if it was something that made me cry, it was almost a relief to like, oh, okay, well, I do still feel. So something's there.
I'm still human.
Yeah. And I didn't necessarily think about it from the other aspect of the hypersexuality, because of course everything is like a spectrum. Yeah. So my mindset was more so, when you're grieving something, grieving a loss, you're generally like, oh, I don't want to be around. I may have a nasty attitude. I may take it out on other people who are still here trying to celebrate and be with me. But I don't think I really thought about the fact that you may become hypersexual. Yeah. And you may develop some other type of patterns just to kind of fill that void. So,
yeah.
All Right. Good point.
And hiding it too, right? So now you're like, oh, I don't want to be judged. Because let's say it is in the loss of a partner, right? So some people who disconnect is because the only person I was having sex with is now passed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that may be a part of like, oh, now I can't have sex with anybody else, you know? And so having to like work through that to actually say, okay, wait, you know, how would my partner actually feel if it was the other way around? You know, does my partner, do they want me to be around here feeling like, you know, there is no other life now, or, you know, etc. Versus the other way, it's like, I'm gonna prove to myself that I am ready and I am still alive and I am living, but yet I don't want other people to know about it. So I have this secret life that's also building guilt, you know, because people are going to judge and say I moved too fast or whatever that may be, right? To actually just start feeling again and to actually touch again. And I don't feel like I can really start a relationship necessarily, right? So now I'm kind of looking like whole tendencies, right? Because I don't want to necessarily start a new relationship because I still feel love for the guy or the person who is gone, right? But I want to feel something.
Right.
And so now I'm going on these excursions because I just really need to feel again and I need an escape, you know? Which in both situations, I think before going into it, because you want to be safe about everything, right? And there's no right or wrong way to do grief. And so being very clear about, okay, what am I going into this for, right? Like I'm aware of what am I going to get out? What am I getting out of this, right? So I don't start a new relationship and the person thinks that I really want more. You know, am I looking for companionship? Am I looking for love? Am I looking for like, what am I really doing? And in between like therapy and coaching is to help you get that awareness. And so you can have open and honest communication with whomever you are dealing with or whatever you're engaging in, right? And not having any shame about it. And even finding the safest way to do that. So even if it's like, oh, well, do you have this one person or this one friend who you can share your location with, who you can say, you know, this is what I'm doing. And then you can have that safe sex talk if you need to. Or the other way around, you know, to say like, what else can I do to help me feel alive? So, yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking, I was listening, of course, but my brain is like, so I was thinking about oftentimes we are very reactive to stuff, but you said something very important in the beginning. You said that, I think you said either death or grief, or death is an equalizer. Like we're all going to experience it. We're all going to experience some type of grief. And I think oftentimes we get to the point after it happens, we want to say, oh, nothing's wrong with me. Or some people may realize I need to go see a coach or I need to see a therapist. But I was just thinking about ways, and I'm always thinking about like strengthening my mental fortitude. I can remember just yesterday as I was driving, I'm like, you know, death is certain, like it's gonna come. And of course you can never fully prepare yourself for when things like that do happen, but we know it's coming. So I was just thinking about ways of possibly having conversations, like if you are in a committed relationship, a long-term relationship, to kind of help you after, you know, just in case.
Yeah.
Like having those hard conversations, like how should life look in the event that you leave before me? And I was just thinking about ways that maybe people can kind of prepare for this situation. It's nothing that you want to talk about. Like, right. I think it's hard to say, let's talk about what's going to happen when I'm gone. But I feel like that may also alleviate some of that guilt. And you can say, well, no, because we had this conversation before such and such passed.
Right.
And we said that we wanted this to be. And I know in certain communities that's prevalent. Yeah. They talk about it. Sometimes that stuff is also set up. So I kind of want to dive a little bit into that, like helping the people who are out there listening, because as you said, we're going to all experience it. What are ways that you could prepare for it that could possibly help in the grieving process once the things are final?
And we all know the traditional ways, right? Setting up a will and et cetera, but definitely having your wishes known, right? To not just your partner, sometimes even to other family members, right? Because once that partner is gone. And a lot of the times, the judgment that we feel from other family members is really what takes the toll, right? Like, oh, they moving on this quick, or they not moving on, or they did cry, or they didn't cry, or, because we're always in the seat of judging what someone else's pain or grief looks like. But I think it's a beautiful conversation to have, actually. I think that to have that type of emotional intelligence, to have a conversation about what that may look like and how you may feel, it may not be the easiest thing to do, but I definitely think it's beneficial to do, right? There's no guessing after that.
Yeah.
It's very clear that I loved him or her and he loved me back. And if love looks like this for us, what would be your wish for me, or how would you imagine that to be so? I mean, even what to do with your remains, like, would you want to, be cremated and be with me all the time? Or like what does that look like? Because there's so many options now, even like you want to be a tree, like what do you want to do? Do you want a traditional funeral, etc.? But it's the whole thing of like options and having that talk, and being very clear.
So I had to laugh because, of course, you will find all kinds of things in the realm of sex. And there was a woman trending very recently who turned her husband or her partner's remains into a dildo. So
I ain't ever heard that one, but that's interesting.
So that could be, a conversation. I don't know if people ever come to you thinking about tips to do before, but I mean, that could be something very realistic to bring up. And in the kink community, we're not into yucking people's yum. So when I heard it, I was like, that's her way of having her person still with her.
Yeah.
Even though it may seem outlandish or extreme to someone, like she still has that person,
Yeah.
And when she wants to feel it. Oh, and I'm sorry, it was not just his ashes. It was also in the shape and size. Like it was a replica.
Okay.
Of his penis. So yeah. So even after death.
So she could use this?
Yeah. So I don't know if I didn't look into logistics because I know I've seen people create like these beautiful like balls, and we know that dildos can be made of like Pyrex or something. So I don't know the logistics. I don't know if she had it kind of like molded and then put it in Pyrex, or if it's this shallow thing that ashes are in. I don't know. I honestly didn't go down that rabbit hole, but we do know that there are options. It's possible. So that, hey, if y'all listening, if you want to figure out what to do with your person's remains, you may be able to, create something.
And when the pain of grief hits, if you have never really truly felt the depths of losing maybe someone to like suicide, maybe, a child, mother, one of those really close ones, you can't really comprehend how that pain feels.
Mm-hmm.
And when you lose them and you grasping for anything to make you still feel any type of attachment to them, and you hold on to anything that you can, I don't find that surprising. Like, I don't find the fact that like she went to what some may say is extreme to still feel her partner. It does not surprise me.
Literally feel her partner.
Literally feel her partner.
Right. Okay, I can see it. All right. I feel like we've kind of talked a lot about grieving the loss of one particular person or like a partner, but there are some times when a family may grieve or a unit may grieve. Like, for instance, in the event that a child dies before the parents die, or one of the partners maybe loses their job and they have to start all over. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when people are grieving as a unit versus in isolation, and what are ways to kind of like overcome that?
So one, everybody wants to be supportive, right? And people don't usually know what to say or how to react or how to show up for each other, right? And then we start to measure our grief, comparing it. Like, oh, I was closer to her. You should, answer the phone for me or whatever, whatever that may be. But as a unit, you want to for sure be honest and communicate, for one, but also take away the judgment of like comparing and saying what the other one should be doing during that time of grieving, right? Like if it's a mother and she lost her, son, but the wife lost her husband, right? And who should be grieving the hardest, or etc., right? Because once again, everybody is individual. And so it's going to show up and look different. But holding that space for each other, but also giving yourself that space and being compassionate for yourself. And so that may look like, maybe I can't call you at this time in this moment because I need to lick my own wounds. I need to hug myself. I need to lay down for a minute, but giving yourself balance, all right? If you share this loss together, it's also a beautiful thing to honor it together, right? So maybe coming up with ways to say, okay, we're going to go and, for his birthday, go and put flowers on his grave together, or we're going to open up a foundation in his name and, maybe into something that he really enjoyed. But all options where you can heal together, but also still communicate honestly, but also still give each other space when needed, because it won't look the same and it won't feel the same for everyone.
That communication aspect, I know that gets to be hard a lot of times.
Yeah.
Even when relationships are going fairly smoothly, communication can be a barrier. I was just thinking about, it was a Tyler Perry movie, and I know it was Janet Jackson and the husband, and I want to say maybe it was like the husband's fault.
She was Perfect Patty.
And then she blamed the husband, and it created like this divide in their relationship, and it just like spiraled like from then on. So I know that was, art imitating life, but there are situations like that. Like if a situation occurs, we see it on the news all the time where, one partner may not be used to having the children, and the child was possibly left in the car and, something happened,
right,
or things like that. So I just couldn't imagine being in that situation, but I'm just thinking about how that probably shows up in the home between the partners, where you've both lost, but now I have this anger towards you because I feel like it's your fault that maybe the person has gone. So,
and that really is going to end up coming down to doing individual work. Okay. Right. So because
doing what?
I say work, individual therapy and coaching, and really, working through the process of grief. And
it's work.
And when I say working through the process of grief, because like I said, once you have had a loss like that, that is your entire life. Your entire life, you will always think of that person. You're going to always think of maybe that situation when it's something that big. But you would like to get to the point where you think of them and you smile. And sometimes you're going to still drop tears, but it won't be as in depth as that first initial pain, right? Even with people with sudden loss, right? Like all of a sudden they went to work, they were young and happy and free, and then you get a phone call and they were in a car accident or whatever, like you will always think about those things. But the other side of loss is also making people appreciate life, right? It gives them the aspect of truly saying, I want to live my life to the fullest. I want to go and do these things. I want to let this person know I love them while they're here. I want to experience this with you right now while you're in this physical form, right? Because the other part of religion and tradition for some people who disconnect, who also feel like they cannot, is if they have religious beliefs that like, oh, this was my one person, right? And so they disconnect from the world. And so working through that, because it's so individualized, working through all of those things with someone helps. So yeah.
And kind of mention this because I gave you like a super loaded question about two things that didn't necessarily relate, but I know that these things could affect people intimately. Like if you're with someone and this person had a dream of what their life was going to look like, their career was going to look like, and for some reason that was taken from them because life happens. We can't always plan for things. So here you are in a relationship that may have been going fine. Like it seemed like it was okay, but now you have a partner who it's grieving the loss of not a human, but what they thought their life would be. Mm-hmm. And so now it affects you as well. And like you said, you want to be supportive, you want to kind of communicate. But what happens when that partner kind of like shuts down and you don't really know what to do? So can we talk about ways to be more supportive? Because I'm also thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when you don't feel safe, or sometimes you can be at the top of that hierarchy and then something happens to unsettle it, like the loss of a job, and you go back down. You're trying to find safety and comfort, and you're back at that base level trying to do that, but you also have someone who loves you and want to help you through that. But it's affecting both of y'all because intimacy is probably going out the window. So when we were on top and we were able to take trips out of the country and pop bottles and do all the things and be self-actualized because I had this stability, I was making this amount, I was the big person on my job, and now that's gone. So I'm going back down to the bottom. So I want to talk about it from the standpoint of possibly both people. Okay. So you have the person who has experienced the loss, and then by proxy, you have the person or people there, because it could be family members as well, who are there with you in the thing, but maybe can't feel it as you feel. So, and that's going to affect intimacy for sure. So what are some ways that the different people in those units can possibly deal with that?
So my first thought is when it comes to a family unit, and I think about stabilizing the kid first, right? Like the child, making sure, because they usually get lost in the shuffle. Mm-hmm. So if mom is in a situation where she can see a broader picture, right? Because maybe dad is the one who lost the job or lost the income or whatever, you know. So let me at least say, how can I stabilize my child, right? How can I have the conversations and communicate to whatever level they're on, and to what they can take in, but stabilizing them and not changing so much of their life, right? And sometimes you can't help that. So it's going to have to be communicating and making sure they know that this is not their fault. This is life right now, you know, etc. Far as when dad is disconnected, you really want to just give him the space, right? But also still saying, I'm here if you need me. You know, you want to show up and allow them to be, or allow them to show up the way they need to, right? But also offering support, but not trying to pat it away either. Allowing them to be angry if they're angry, allowing them to, because what we think is once we go into those feelings and those emotions that people will never come out. And that's not true. It's emotions, right? It's in motion. It's going. If you allow it to come up, it's going to like take its moments and its time, and it's going to do what it needs to do. Now, if it's a prolonged bereavement, then yes, you need therapy, right? Like if it's been months and they just like still in this funk and you see no light at the end of the tunnel, then definitely there needs to be some professional engagement. But for the most part, giving them that space, but reassuring them, you know, and not taking it personal, right? Like he's rejecting me.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And knowing, and for yourself, but also still have that compassion and that gentleness for yourself to take care of yourself, right? So even though he's reacting like this and you feel like it's mirroring back something to you that maybe triggers something in you, being very clear that he's going through his own experience.
All right. And to the person who has actually experienced the loss themselves, because you talked about, and you kind of talked about it, and we do that as women. We want to be the savior. We want to put that mask on the child first when we're actually like grieving or hurting ourselves. And I get it. Like, you know, oftentimes we feel like we need to be the stronger people. But I want you to talk a little bit to the person who's actually experienced the loss and feels like it's all about them. And it's like, you don't understand because you didn't lose the job or you didn't do this, and that. And a lot of times it's hard for us to kind of look at the situation and say, yes, it happened to me, but these people love me and they're here for me and they're trying to support me. how can I be better? You know, and not make them feel a certain way, even though I'm going through this thing, which I know it's not easy.
Right.
It's work, as you mentioned. Like, a lot of people don't want to do the work because that work is hard. It's very hard. Yeah. It's holding mirrors, it's being accountable, it's communicating.
Yes.
And that's very hard for people. So if you can give just some tips for people who are actually going through the thing, and sometimes we feel like the world is all about us. Like, you don't understand because you didn't lose, or, you know, you shut the person out and you don't understand how your actions are affecting them when they just want to be there and be as supportive. So speak to that in the people, because it's going to happen.
So no doubt that the world is all about them. No doubt, just like for your kids, the world is all about them, right? Mm-hmm. And for the, you know, for the person that's going through it, yes, you don't understand. And that's the thing. You don't even need to try to understand. You just need to support, right? Okay. The person that's going through it, though, keeping in mind, and I know it's super hard, and that's why leaning on others when possible is important, because even though this is the sole thing that's happening right now, there's so many other things that's going on that is also reality, right? And then you sometimes are so deep in the hole that you can't even grasp the tools. You can't grab what you need to get yourself out of the hole because you're so deep in it. Right. And in order to do that, you have to at least have a point of awareness where, oh, she just came in the room and asked me, you know, she left the therapist number on the bed. She asked me to call a coach. You know, she did say, you know, well, I'm going to feed you today. Like, you know, like taking the opportunity when those olive branches come mm-hmm. and say, okay, I need to really remember that there's other things in here that life goes on that I need to grab, you know? And so then in coaching, we would ask certain questions like, okay, we talked about the pain. We talked about what happened. What do you think that you could maybe take away from the situation? What do you think from that job? What is it? Was there anything else that you wanted to do? You know, is there anything else that could have happened and transitioned you to think, to reframe the situation so you can see it from another lens and move towards that versus saying, I am here, this is it, and there's nothing left to do, you know?
It made me think about having people like you in your toolbox, because you mentioned therapy, you mentioned coaching, and oftentimes we know therapy is an option, but we don't want to utilize it because you're like, oh, I'm not crazy. I don't need therapy. The therapist ain't going to do nothing. They can't help me. I'm going through such and such. I lost my job. I don't have money to pay a therapist. And not that a coach is any less, but even considering like a coach, do you think it's ever too early or too late to possibly have a coach? And how could having a coach kind of like effectively bridge that gap and help the people going through the thing? Like, what would a coach be able to offer?
So it's never too early and never too late, to be honest. As long as you still are here and you still are going through things, because your thoughts are everything, right? So as long as you still are thinking and retelling the stories to yourself of the things that make you feel a certain way, then no, it's never too late. A coach is there to truly move you to the future, right? So they're supporting you to where you want to get. And sometimes you don't even realize that you need to get somewhere else, right? So when you're ready, we're there, right? To help keep the hope that you felt like there is none, to remind you and to like grab your hand and say, okay, remember we talked about this. Remember that you had this dream. Remember this is things that you wanted to do, and give you tools to help you get there, right? So, okay, you need to go work out today. Did you work out? Holding you accountable for things, you know? And really just showing up for you in a way, in a time when you feel like you can't show up for yourself.
And keeping that normalcy.
Yeah.
Because you feel like, oh, everything's over. It's just, you know, whatever. Yeah. But keeping some sense of normalcy, I do think helps you to do it.
And the goal is to coach ourselves out of a job, really. Like, it's supposed to give you all the things that you now I know, okay, I tried for coaching world tapping, if that's one of the things that you tried and you're like, this works for me. Oh, I know that I need to get up and I need to go exercise. I know that I journal on these days when she pisses me off and whatever. This is what I go and do versus grabbing alcohol, versus grabbing, a drug, versus whatever your vice is. You go and now you're swapping those things out for something. Fucking. Either way, you go and grab other things or vices that will be more supportive than where you want to go.
Okay. Wait, so you just mentioned something that, as you said it, I was possibly trying to figure out what it was. And I didn't necessarily know the term, so I didn't know if you defined it afterwards. But tapping, is it like tapping into like what's really, tell us what tapping is.
So tapping is basically you're moving the energy you're moving the energy out of your body, right? And so you do I guess you can say a rating in the beginning, and a lot for like people who are anxious and deal with a lot of like anxiety. But you go to neural ending like points, which is like eyebrows, side of eyes.
Oh, so physically
tapping.
Okay.
And it helps to calm the nervous system. So another way of like calming your nervous system, or like grounding in a sense.
Okay.
But you would go through the different techniques or different tapping points, and then you would rate yourself again at the end.
Okay.
And to say, okay, but then you're releasing certain negative thoughts starting off when you're tapping on the side of the hand. And so you're like, right now I do not believe that I'm worthy of being loved. Everybody I love dies and pass away, whatever that is. And then when you're moving into the other points, you're saying things like, I know that I'm loved. I'm here for a reason, and I'm going to find my purpose. And you started putting in positive thoughts. So tapping is one of the tools.
Okay. And these are things that we don't know. And that's why it's important to have coaches and therapists and people helping us along. And since I just said that, can you have coaching and therapy together?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I've definitely had clients, and even if your therapist is open with working with your coach, right? So they will go over and review certain things as long as you gave permission about your case and just where you want to go and what you want to do, and saying, therapy is more like, so if you had a scale that you were looking at from like 1 to 10, and let's say therapy is 10 and coaching is 1, and it's certain things like anxiety, right? Like some people need medication to help them get to the point where coaching can ground them enough to help them move on to further, right? And move to the future that they want. So depending on like where you are on that scale, how much coaching and therapy can help, but they definitely work together, because the goal is therapy is going to talk to you more and more about your past. Coaching touches on your past, but the goal is to move you forward. Okay. So it's like, okay, we worked on this way of time management. That didn't work. Okay, so how about let's set a time on your phone. When you go in the store, do you have your grocery list? All right. If you want to work on time management. So we have usually a specific target, and we're moving towards that. Versus therapy is more like, okay, what in your past made you believe that you didn't have to show up on time?
Okay.
And they may talk a little longer on that. But when it comes to medication, et cetera, coaches don't administer any type of medication where a therapist could.
Okay. All right. So us being here is definitely a full circle moment, because one day I was on the phone with her and I'm sitting in the bed with my glasses on. And she was like, "Oh, Sean, you look cute with your glasses on. You should record in your bed and you should call it which story time." That's what she said. And so, like most things, I just put it off forever. And then it was brought up to me again by someone else. He was Brian. He was like the first person I did the show with. So just sitting here now is definitely a full circle moment. And when I brought the idea to her, she was like, "Well, like, what does that have to do with sex? What does me being a grief coach have to do with sex?" And one of my biggest things is, yes, I enjoy talking about kink. Yes, I enjoy hosting parties, but I'll talk a lot about communication, because a lot of times we feel like if I know all the tips, tricks, best things to do, then everything's going to be okay, when we haven't tapped into that other person. We haven't tapped into ourselves to see what our needs are. You brought up hypersexuality at the beginning. Like, why am I even doing this? Why am I wanting to sleep with somebody every single night? Why am I putting myself in a situation to be hurt when you're not doing the work?
Yeah.
And like, I know you mentioned the physically tapping in, but not tapping into yourself to see what's going on. So we want to be aware of people like Coach K who can provide those tools. And as we said, we did talk a lot about grief when it comes to death, but grief isn't always death. It could be the loss of your home. We talked a little bit about the loss of your career. Sometimes, we're gonna get older. Like if we're not dying, we're getting older. So our body changes. So the person who may have once been, in tip-top shape, like circumstances or life has made that change. So now you're grieving the person you were.
Getting diagnosed with different health concerns and issues, right? And, I had the experience of miscarriages, right? That's also, I jumped right back into work and started working as if like, oh, I didn't have a baby, so I don't get those 6 weeks off. And so I just go back to work until someone says, oh, well, how's the pregnancy going? And then you're breaking down at work, right? But I didn't even give myself that time to even like connect, like, oh, this was a loss, and at any stage of it, from the time that you know that you are pregnant to the, and it doesn't matter if you were 5 days pregnant. It's like you have started to grow a bond or attachment to that thought and to that belief. So definitely giving yourself grace with any loss, and just know that it's natural and it's a part of life, and that you'll go through the phases, and some days it'll be easier than others.
Our whole purpose is today is just to make you aware that there are people who can help you to be proactive in those things. We know loss is going to come, and I know that you cannot physically, mentally, spiritually prepare yourself for any type of loss, because we can say we'll do these things, but you don't know until it happens. We did talk about it ever being too early. So honestly, just sitting here thinking, I don't think it would be a bad idea to possibly tap in with a coach just to kind of like strengthen your mind. I'm always thinking about like strengthening my mental fortitude. So as I said, we may respond differently when the thing happens, but if we have those tools in our
toolbox,
thank you, then it may make that transition a little easier. Or like she said, speaking with your loved one or someone about how they would like your life to look once they're gone. So just doing those things that are proactive, I think, can help a lot. And if we're talking about it in regard to intimacy, we know that whatever is going on in our head is probably going to show up in our body, and it can manifest different ways. It can manifest as stress. It can manifest as weight gain. It can manifest as hair loss. It can manifest as you just shutting down, feeling numb. It looks different for different people. But knowing there are people who can help you get through those things, help you be a mediator, I feel like having all of those things will help you with your intimacy journey. And if you do lose someone you love who is close to you and your partner, you may be able to say, well, you know what? I'm at peace with it because we talked about this. We had this conversation. So we know that people like to insert themselves all the time. And like you said, they may be like, well, dang, they just lost a person. It's too soon. They must have been there all along. Or it's been 10 years. When are you going to move on? There's never satisfying anyone. And your goal is not necessarily to satisfy anyone, but people saying those things could weigh on you. But if you've had the conversation or conversations with the person it really matters with, then I feel like you can be more at peace. Yeah. So my goal is to always just help you realize those things that can help you holistically and help you with your intimacy, like things we don't even tend to think about. So what does grief have to do with intimacy? A lot.
Yeah. And intimacy, right?
Yes.
Right. And so if you're grieving, then that is an opportunity to really see someone, right? It's an opportunity. And a lot of times when people are shutting you down or they're uncomfortable with your tears, right? They're uncomfortable with your sadness. And so they tend to try to hush you up, right? Like, okay, all right, it's over with. Like, okay, after the funeral, and in different religions, some religions, they keep the body for like a month, and so like Ours is so final. Ours is so quick, right? Everybody bring chicken to the repast, and we just, get together, and then everybody goes home, and you're left there feeling like my life does not go on, and so reaching out to someone to support you, reaching out when you need it, crying when you need it, etc. You don't have to necessarily be around people who are uncomfortable with it, but know that that's not your issue, that's theirs.
All right. I think Coach K has given us some excellent information, and we can definitely see how grief can tie into intimacy. And I mean grief from any area of the spectrum, how it can affect you mentally, physically, and spiritually, and ultimately show up with you intimately and sexually. And we want to be able to have that sense of normalcy or be able to move on, because sex is a need, like we maybe want to villainize it and act like it's not a thing, but it's a thing, and it has scientific aspects that help in the healing process. So having you on has been super amazing, but the people may want to know, how can they reach you? So how can we find Coach K?
So my IG is Lotus_Effect_coaching. It's one way to reach me. My website is Lotus Effect Coaching. So either way, inbox me, etc., or send me a message on my website. But yeah, that's how you can find me.
All right. So I think having someone like Coach K can definitely be healing to the soul and help with those transitioning times. Or are you open to talking to people about just building themselves mentally to have those things in their toolbox to be prepared before something happens?
Definitely. So it is a two-part, because I do self-improvement as well. So most of the time people come for self-improvement and realize they're grieving. Because for some reason, grief is almost like a dirty word like sex. I don't know. They just... But
ain't nothing as dirty as sex.
They run from it like But yeah, so even if it's not necessarily grief and it's just self-improvement around other things that you want to move from just being to thriving, then yes, definitely reach out.
All right. So this has been another great session, and hopefully all that we talked about has been healing to your soul. And please reach out to Coach K. And if you are looking for some sexual coaching because you feel like, I'm pretty good with that grieving thing, or we can work together. Because I actually ordered us a book. It hasn't come in, but the title of the book is Sex After Grieving. I think that's the exact title. And it just lets you know that there's definitely a correlation. So if you're looking at the grieving process or the self-improvement process, definitely reach out to Coach K. If you're looking to work on getting back into the saddle sexually, or ways to kind of like go back into the intimacy part, like more hands-on type stuff, or just things you could work on, please feel free to contact me. And that is all. I enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thanks.
Oh, and y'all, so I'm starting up something Sunday service, just because I feel like my journey with sex, or being a sex coach or a sexologist, is ever expanding. And one of the things that I wanted to do very early on, and you will talk yourself out of things because I'm not ready. I don't know what gives me the right, all of those things, when all the time I've spent on education, or all that I've invested in myself in certifications, or all of these books I've read, or all of these relationships that I've built, or all of these people who actually believe in me are coming to me. And what I found within the community is it's not always just about sex. As y'all know, I do host parties, and people come and they be themselves and they enjoy being around like-minded people, and we have munches. And what I found is that sometimes people will message me before or after or the next day and say, I wasn't feeling well and I didn't feel like coming, but I'm so glad I showed up to be around my family. And I talk about community, communication, family a whole lot, because I feel like that's what we've developed at this point. So I just feel like perpetuating my journey and being a service to the people and just talking about healing, I want to start tapping more into that. So this episode, of course, we are fully clothed. But I'm not wearing my Keep Get Tired, but you see how it parallels. So Coach K is actually going to be our speaker for something I am piloting called Sunday Service. It's a concept that has been on my mind for probably the last 6 years before I even came like a certified sex coach or sexologist. And it's not at all to take the place of church or anything, but we all have a different spiritual walk, and that walk looks differently for everybody. Some people's tradition is showing up to a church, or some people's tradition may just be to pray or to meditate or do different things. But one thing I know is we enjoy getting together with like-minded people. And so this month, Coach K is going to talk to us more about grieving, and hopefully give us some tips and do some activities for us to help make that grieving and intimacy connection. So it's going to be Sunday service. It's not going to be a lot of people. It'll be a brunch type thing. She'll come in and speak. We're going to eat, drink, and be merry and have a great time in community, and just helping us just become more whole people. So I'm super excited about that coming up in 2 weeks. If you have any questions or you may be interested in it, and I'm saying 2 weeks, but I forgot this thing actually has to be recorded.
What has to be recorded?
You gotta edit it, all that kind of shit. All right. So Sunday service is actually gonna be on October 29th. So I'm not sure at what point you're seeing this, and it may be after the fact. And if so, we've had Sunday service and it's been a great time. And Coach K has given us some excellent words, but super excited about what's to come. And you will definitely be seeing more things on Sensual Sessions that are dealing with healing and how it connects to sex, intimacy, sexuality, and so on. So thank you for joining us again, and see you next time.